Now we're going to use what we've learned about beat points and archetypes to analyze a current Christian fantasy book. Now this book is a great example of youth fantasy. It has all 4 and 5-star reviews on the Christian publisher site from Christians and on Amazon and mostly on Goodreads. It is marketed as Christian from a very well-known, very conservative Christian publisher. It's a coming-of-age arc, and generally in this kind of arc, the character does not fit in with their village. So Katniss Everdeen in the Hunger Games is expected to comply, and in the opening scene she is hunting, which is breaking the law, not complying, and we learn she does it all the time. Divergent, Triss does not fit into one of the 5 groups of people that everyone is required to fit into. And in How to Train Your Dragon, Hiccup can't fight dragons, and that's what Vikings do. So a coming-of-age arc usually leads to one of 4 things. It's either a challenging of the village, a leaving the village, a changing the village, or choosing to take their place as part of the village. Now, most often the character changes the village by learning the theme. So Hiccup in How to Train Your Dragon teaches the village that dragons can be their friends, not their enemies. And there are 3 arcs that usually happen in trilogies. So in the first book or movie in a trilogy, there's the coming of age arc. And then in the second movie of the How to Train Your Dragon trilogy, Hiccup saves the village and becomes a hero, completing his hero arc. And this is common in trilogies where you'll have the coming of age arc in book or movie 1, the coming into the hero arc for book or movie 2, and then in the third, you have a monarch arc. So in the third How to Train Your Dragon movie, Hiccup's father and mentor dies at the All Is Lost beat, and Hiccup becomes the chief of his village, completing his monarch arc. Now there is a 4th arc, but usually we see it within a hero's story, and it's the mentor. The mentor must transfer his wisdom to the next generation in a sage arc. In Iron Man, Tony Stark completes all 4 arcs. So in Iron Man 1, he begins as a man-child, and by the end of his journey, he is a mentor to young Peter Parker in the Spider-Man movies, eventually sacrificing himself to save the world at the end of Endgame. Now, back to the youth fiction book that we are analyzing. Here are the beat points. The snapshot of the character. She is smart, rich, and hates domestic girl stuff. Now, the hates domestic girl stuff is typical of coming-of-age arcs. The hero has to have something in the world that shows they want to change, though it will take the inciting incident to force them into their journey. But specifically, this discontent with what is expected in their village or world is common for the coming-of-age arc. Now, the opening scene is a very strong scene. This book was only the author's 2nd novel, if I understand correctly, but the editor, who's written many books, helped her rewrite this scene, and you can tell. And it employs 3 strong techniques. The first technique that it uses is the save the cat technique. Saving the cat is when you need to take a character like this one, who is selfish and unrelatable. She saves the cat by talking her father into writing a letter of pardon to save a man from the gallows. Now, here's our comparison technique. Her father is shown as weak and uncaring. The daughter is shown as strong, resilient, and caring about someone else. So we have our weak father archetype. The second technique that is used is foreshadowing. There's this monster merperson who is speaking to her father when she comes in, and this monster merperson acts a little possessive of her. But she's not threatened. This, again, shows her bravery and is more of a snapshot of the character. But the reader gets the idea that there is something that she does not know. Now, just a note on foreshadowing. I found that it's easiest to add foreshadowing in after I've finished the book, and go back sometimes. So in my King Thrushbeard retelling, I went back and showed how OCD the hero was. In one scene, he straightens benches, even though he knows the benches are going back to the church the next day. He just needs them straight. And in another scene, he's meticulously lining up his flour bags and breathing out a sigh of relief as he takes control of his space. So he seems very humble, but I just added a couple sentences in a few places about his need to control to make it believable when he tried to control the people he ruled over later on in the story. Now, I've also actually found this helpful in a series. So last month, I put a clue about the antagonist, and I put that clue in scene 1 of book 1, and that is going to be fully revealed at the climax of book 6. And so it's much easier to just add in a little bit of foreshadowing later once you've gotten everything figured out yourself as an author. Now, the third technique that is used brilliantly in this scene is irony. And I touched on it a little. The character thinks one thing, but the reader is noticing something else. And it's really hard to do, but one day you'll be writing and you'll realize, I did it, and you'll be really excited. And here the author is showing the father's defeated body language, and the daughter is thinking how strong he is. So now we come to our inciting incident. She finds out that before she was born, in a Jephthah's vow situation to save her dying brother, her father was forced to agree for her to marry the king of the monster mer people in order to preserve the monster mer line. She was sealed with a magical mark before birth, and the mer king now has a legal contract to marry her. Only death will break the contract. Now, she definitely won't marry a monster mer person to preserve his dying people, which is more showing of the character. So she steals a body and she runs away. Now this is the starting of the journey, and this is also the rejection of the theme, which the author would say to face problems. And this will launch us into Act 2. So, remember Act 2 is an opposite of Act 1. In Act 1, she is rich, protected nobility. In Act 2, she's penniless, vulnerable, and friendless. She's also pretending to be a boy. Now, she's disguised, which is common for the coming-of-age arc because she has to see her village from a different perspective. Now she's in the fun and games section, and she's pretending to be a boy, which fits her hate of the domestic, and she builds her science abilities, thereby growing her power through magic by working for a demon-possessed magician. Remember in Act 2 that you are meeting other characters who would not have drawn out the things in the hero to help them learn the lesson. So she's built her allies, which is fellow magicians, and she gains a mentor, who is the magician's assistant. And he speaks the theme and tells her to stop running away from her problems. Now, he later tells her that he magically knows that she was lying about being a boy, but he lets her in and pretends along with her. Now, the mentor also gives her an example of facing problems by trying to help the magician. This brings us up to the midpoint, the turning point, while the magician she works for is fighting a duel. Her mentor, the assistant, tells her to disobey the magician and make him lose the duel because the demon inside the magician would be too dangerous if he wins. Now, disobeying the only authority that she has left is vital foreshadowing of how she's going to defeat the Mer King that she's tied to. And as a result of disobeying this only authority, the magician punishes her by magically making her 8 months older. She is devastated by his wrong toward her and justifies her plan to steal a curse from him that will remove the magical mark that ties her to her fate, and by which the Merton people can track her. Now, this causes her to reject the lie of wanting to run and causes her to begin to embrace the theme of facing her problems by breaking laws in order to get what she wants. Now, in most books, when a character justifies sin because of a perceived wrong, this will actually start them into a negative character arc. But in this book, it is treated as a logical step in her positive character arc. She uses weak authority to justify grasping for power. Sound familiar? Now the bad guys close in. The broken contract legally allows the monster merpeople to look for her in the city. Innocent people die in the fighting, and the monster merpeople torture a few of her allies to find out where she is, killing a few of them. Now she has a conversation with the Merking, and she tells him she'll never bow to him. Her disrespect against him is shown as a positive because she is following the theme. She is beginning to face her problems rather than run from them. She then goes as planned and steals the spell from the magician and removes the tracker on her arm. Now the monster Merking kidnaps her sister, demanding that she honor the contract. And we come to the plot twist. Surprise! She's a girl. Her friends accuse her of lying and causing the death of many people, but within a page they forgive her and agree to help her, so no consequences. Next comes a rallying of the troops. They plan to kill the Merking and some of his merpeople. The battle begins. Her mentor, the magician's apprentice, is killed by the demon in the battle. So this brings about a death and resurrection. She has learned the theme to face her problems. Her mentor has died, but she takes up his mantle and essentially steps into his place as leader of the teen magicians. Together, they use their spells to face the merpeople. Now, if the merpeople have a legal authority that was given to them before her birth, this is essentially an anarchy, facing and killing these authorities by using stolen power and the help of the demon. But she does, and she kills the Merking and many of his people, condemning the rest of them to die off. Then she casts out the demon from the magician by her own power and by the spells that she has learned and stolen. So the climax actually comes after the death of the merpeople, when she faces the demon inside the magician and does not abandon him to it, but rather faces it, even though there wouldn't be consequence of her to leave it as much. This brings us into the home changed. Now, she's not changed, but those around her have changed because they will not make her do the boring domestic stuff anymore, but will let her spend her days at the magician's house helping him and learning more and growing her power. Her father pathetically apologizes and agrees to her marrying the commoner she likes, as the father says he's made enough decisions for her, she can do what she wants. Now remember, in a feminist narrative, the anti-feminists repent, even though they were not the ones who went on the journey or learned the theme. Now, I would say that what the writer thinks is the theme is that the character needs to face her problems instead of running from them. And in this case, an authority she doesn't want is her problem, so she needs to kill him and a bunch of his people and condemn the rest of them to die off. Now, I would actually disagree that this is the theme. I would actually say that the real theme here is sacrifice. And sacrifice is what she needed to learn to do. Remember in our snapshot, we saw that she doesn't like doing menial house stuff. Hate of the domestic is actually a hate of daily sacrifice for others. So when a bigger sacrifice is asked of her, to lay down her desire to save a race is not even a consideration. So, burn a corpse, run away. The turning point is where she was forced to lose 8 months of her life, and stealing power in the form of the spell is her response. So by accident, I think that the author gave us an anti-Christian message. A refusal to submit to any authority kills the one, disobeys the next. Number 2, sacrificing her desires to birth a generation, not even a consideration. And number 3, grasping for power through sciences to save herself instead of to be saved by a Christ figure. Independence and stealing power from authorities is what saves her.